Hello, magic makers. It sounds like you are all out and about having a wonderful Beltane today. That is fantastic. So I'm just going to create a video for you to follow at your leisure. All right, here we go. I'm calling this one Inanna Arises, and you will find out soon why I call it that. Today, we have Venus in Aries and Beltane, also known as May Day. So, where does the name Beltane come from? Let's nerd out on it. Bel means sun or bright or fortunate, or all three. Tane comes from meaning fire. Welcome, note taker. So we have Bel meaning sun, bright, and fortunate, and Tane meaning fire for Beltane. The May Queen, which is really Brigid, defeats the Winter Queen every year at this time and restores warmth and abundance and banishes and vanquishes scarcity mindset. This is the time of year when, of course, Persephone returns from the underworld, but long before Persephone, there was Inanna, who ascended after 3 days in the underworld. Does that sound familiar? I wonder why. Well, we'll get back to that. But first, let's talk a little bit about Beltane or May Day. So, May Day is actually a combination of two ancient holidays. So, we have the Celtic Beltane and the Roman Floralia. And together, these two traditions created what we now know as May Day. First, I want to address a couple of misconceptions about Beltane, the Celtic holiday. First of all, it was not a fertility rite. There are some fertility rites in Celtic lore, but this is not one of them. That is where Floralia came in. That was very much a rutting rite. Also, it was not a time of ritual sacrifice. Whoever told you that is full of it. That comes from Christian propaganda that was written way after the fact, and frankly, there's no evidence for it. There's no big piles of bones. There's no big piles of charred teeth. None of that exists. And also, it just makes no sense. The Celts were pretty smart and they figured out pretty quickly, like, if we make a human sacrifice of a young and, healthy person, it doesn't seem to have any bearing on whether or not we have a good harvest. So let's not do that. How about? The truth of it is that what they would do is have a big giant bonfire to celebrate the return of warmth and the sun. They would take big wooden circles, wooden wheels, and set them on fire and roll them down the hill, and then people would try to jump through them. As you can imagine, this resulted in a lot of injuries, so eventually they stopped doing that. And what they started doing instead is in the big bonfire, they would bake bannock, which is a kind of round bread, and it had a cross on the front. And the parts that got too burned to eat, they would sacrifice. They would throw it to the wolf or the fox or the rat to get predators, tricksters, and diseases to go elsewhere, saying, kind of bribing them to be like, hey, maybe stay away from us this year. They also had these big wheels of cheese, which they marked in the same way with that big cross. And they would, roll the big wheel of cheese down the hill, kind of like they used to do with those burning wheels. And when they landed at the bottom, if they landed cross up, that was a omen of a good harvest. They landed cross down, omen of a bad harvest. So sort of a coin toss as to how the harvest was going to be that year. Another tradition during Beltane was to take a torch and, well, first of all, you would clean out your hearth. Okay, so your fire, you would like put it out completely, clean out your entire hearth. These this bonfire was cleansing. They would usually have actually two big bonfires, and people would walk between the two of them to purify. They would also walk their livestock through to purify their livestock. So these are some traditions. Hi, Jesse. Welcome. I'm just kind of walking through the Beltane traditions.
Hi.
Go back and rewatch the beginning of this to get all the fun backstory. So These are purifying bonfires. And so people would walk through them. The smoke would actually get rid of lice and other insects and things. So it was a very literal purification ritual. Then what they would do is, having cleaned out their hearth, they would take a torch and relight it with this bonfire. And then they would bring that back into their homes. Now they would walk through as they walked into their homes so as not to bring any fae along with them, a big green bower at the front, which was intended to distract the fae and kind of get them stuck because they love flowers, they love greenery, so they would kind of get stuck at your front door and not follow you inside. Then you would relight your fire, and if anyone came during the night to ask for fire, that was not a person. They knew this because everybody in the village had access to the bonfire. And so if somebody came to your door asking for fire, you would just tell them, go get it from the bonfire. There's no fire for you here. Because otherwise, that's probably a fae trying to come inside and create mayhem. Another important detail is if you do decorate your front door with greenery, do not take it inside afterwards because then you're just bringing the fae that have gotten trapped in your greenery into your house and inviting mayhem and madness. So leave that outside. This is also a great time to leave flowers on other people's doorsteps, leave greenery on other people's doorsteps. So this is kind of the May Day tradition of, putting a bouquet of flowers at a neighbor's doorstep and running away. It's sort of like fun mischief, well-meant mischief. The Another tradition that grew out of this is the hawthorn bush. So they would take a hawthorn bush, put it in the center of the village, and decorate it with bright eggshells and little colored stones and ribbons and pretty things like that. And this became pretty competitive. They actually had like competitions between villages, and it got so cutthroat that people would actually go and steal or destroy each other's hawthorn bushes in the middle of the night. Got pretty intense. This tradition actually grew into the maypole tradition. That was not a Celtic tradition. This is a very specifically English tradition from the 1600s. They started putting up having the teenagers, the youth, to go out into the forest and get a tall, thin tree to bring back for the maypole. And this became a great excuse for the youth to go out into the forest and do what youth do in forests. So this is part of where people thought of this as a fertility tradition. But again, that kind of comes from Floralia and also from teenagers taking the excuse to go and get their needs met in the woods and to blame it on those naughty, naughty Celts because it's a Celtic tradition. All right. The labor movement later kind of co-opted May Day, and it is now a really popular time for protests. So you may notice that there are protests happening all over the place right now. That is a great way to celebrate May Day. Another great way to celebrate May Day is to create what I call a May bowl. So it's just a big bowl of water in which you float lots of different kinds of wildflowers that you find outside. And this is just a way to kind of say thank you to the May Queen and recognize her victory over the Winter Queen at this time of year. Which brings us back to the story of Inanna. Where do these stories come from of death, rebirth, resurrection? There's so many of these stories across all of world mythology, but this is the oldest one that we know of, the oldest one that at least was eventually written down. I also want to point out, so I pulled this morning, I usually pull a card, but today I pulled runes, just to be different. And the runes I pulled are Hail and Ingwaz. So this is Hail, that's hell, essentially. This is the underworld. And then this is fertility, virility, rebirth. So we have death, rebirth. Couldn't have been more perfect, right? So I want to talk a little bit about Inanna. So also, I want to say Pluto, who is again god of the underworld, goes retrograde on May 4th. Now he's not going to go retrograde all the way back into Capricorn. He's done with Capricorn. He's going to stay in Aquarius, but he will be retrograde for a little while. And when when the god of death goes retrograde, we're in for some death. There's definitely going to be some endings. And we've had a lot of that already. So I can, kind of feel some of you going, oh, oh, oh. But it is important. It is part of this cycle. Things need to burn down so that we can rise from the ashes. So let's talk about Inanna. Her story comes from an epic Sumerian poem called The Descent of Inanna. It's one of the oldest epic poems that we have that survive. And the story is that she was the goddess of heaven, the sky. And her sister, she had a long-standing rivalry with her sister. Can anyone relate? Yeah, relatable. um, she had a long-standing rivalry with her sister, Eresh Kigal, who was the goddess of the dead, the underworld. But when Eresh Kigal's husband died, now this part of the story honestly makes no sense to me. Like, why is she upset that her husband is dead? Doesn't that just mean that he's now in the land of the dead where she rules? I don't know. I don't get it. But anyway, also it's a totally different name than the one that she's usually ascribed to as her husband, but doesn't matter. Anyway, the story goes that her husband died and she's in grief. And so Inanna, wanting to comfort her sister and be there for the funeral rites, comes down from heaven and tries to descend all the way to the underworld, but she is stopped at the first of seven gates. There are seven gates to get into the underworld. And at that first of seven gates, she sends word, hey, tell Eresh Kigal her sister's here to see her. So when Eresh Kigal gets this message, she's like, oh no, my sister is coming in my weakened state to try to take over. Heaven isn't enough for her. She wants the underworld too. So, she's always been the golden child. Daddy always liked her better. And she's not getting hell, damn it. It's mine. It's actually called cool in this version. I'm keeping cool for myself. Keeping cool. That's funny. So she's there at the first gate and she's like, okay, fine, whatever. What do I need to do to get through? And so at each of the successive seven gates, she has to sacrifice something on her. So she has all these like royal accoutrements. She's got a crown, she's got a scepter, she's got all these things that have protective powers, weapons, right? She has to give them all up one by one until she's finally completely naked and vulnerable as she goes through the final gate. And so then she comes before her sister. She says, "Sister, please, I've come to support you in your time of need." And her sister's like, "I don't believe you. I'm not in a good place right now. And how dare you come down here?" And basically murders her. She straight up murders her in cold blood and hangs her on a hook. Sounds a lot like a crucifixion, right? Well, guess what? She left word before she left, because she's pretty clever, that if she was not back in 3 days' time, that someone should go and tell Enki, her father, that she needed some help. So, sure enough, her kind of maidservant goes to Enki and is like, "Hey, Enki, Mr. Anunnaki God, your daughter is in some trouble in the underworld." And he's like, "Say no more." He takes the dirt from under his fingernails, and from it, he creates these androgynous beings. They're neither male nor female. And because of this, they are able to slip into the gates of the underworld unnoticed and can also slip out again. So, being gender nonconformist does have its privileges, apparently. But so they go down there, and instead of like coming out guns blazing, being like, "Give back Inanna or else," they come in there and they just go, "Areshki Gal, what's going on? What's up with you?" And she starts crying and she goes through her grief, and they just hold space and they just listen, and she gets through her whole story, and then she's like, "And now I see that that was probably pretty stupid, and I probably shouldn't have murdered my sister. That's probably not the way to handle this, and I feel really bad. Can you please take her back up to heaven to be resurrected?" And they're like, "Sure, we can do that for you. No worries." So they take Inanna back up to heaven. She is resurrected as da 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 the morning star. So, yes, this is a reference to Venus, who periodically disappears from the night sky and then reappears as the morning star. It is also later a reference to Lucifer, who is God's favorite angel until he falls. But this is the original story, at least that we know of that death, rebirth, and resurrection cycle. So, what I wanted to talk about today is how, of course, we have all of these stories and all of this common lore because everything dies and then it comes back. Energy is never really lost. It dies, it's reborn. It dies, it's reborn. It's all part of this endless cycle, right? And Beltane is this beautiful time of year when we come back into warmth, we come back into abundance, we come back into life. We come from the underworld back into the light. So I wanted us to take a moment today to do two things. The first thing is we're going to hold some space for ourselves, for our inner Ereshkigal, who is grieving, who is angry, who is paranoid, who is in fear, right? I want us to take a moment to just hold space for the grief that we've been holding for ourselves and kind of collectively lately. So the first thing we're going to do is just take a moment and write a rant about all the things that we're grieving or angry about. And then we're going to come back and, like Inanna, we're going to rise above. So, are there any questions before we start our grief rant? No? Okay, fabulous. Let's do it. So, did we what did we grieve for? What came up?
Um, so it took me a minute to get started, and I ended up typing instead of writing.
It's all right.
So give me a second to
No worries.
find my little document here. Okay. All right. So um I wrote for my grief rant, I wrote I am grieving my body, the one that was 20 pounds lighter, the one that could hear, the one that was strong, the one that didn't leak urine if it moved too fast or coughed or sneezed, the one who cared about what she ate, who cooked meals from scratch. I'm grieving the person I didn't become, the warrior I left behind. And that's all I got so far.
Oh, I love that. That's so powerful. I went much more kind of collective on this one, kind of grieving the loss of, honestly, the illusion of a system that we thought that we had.
Mm.
Kind of a loss of innocence, right? Where we sort of realized, like, oh, that's not what I thought it was. And and grieving the loss of freedom that a lot of us are experiencing right now, loss of rights and loss of freedoms and loss of abundance and loss of prosperity and access to things that some of us had access to before that we no longer do. Um, but yeah, I mean, that was kind of the overall feeling of it was like, oh, what I'm grieving actually never existed. That's very interesting. Something we thought that we had that we actually didn't have.
Yeah.
But I love that looking at this on a more sort of personal level, like, yeah, man, I grieve my teeth. My teeth got all messed up and are all like chipped along here. And it makes me sad. I miss my
I
old
know.
boo.
Yes. Boo.
Yeah. I miss the elasticity of my younger skin and all these things. I definitely do. And I also just miss the energy of youth, the
Yeah.
ability to just jump up and do stuff at any time of the day or night without like injuring yourself.
Hmm.
Like, how many out there can relate to, how did you injure yourself? I don't fucking know. I got out of, okay? Like, it just started hurting. I don't know what to tell you. Absolutely. So now what we're going to do is we're going to kind of step into our morning star phase. We are rising from the ashes and looking ahead to what do I want to expect from here on out? What am I going to accept henceforth? What am I not going to be accepting? So this is kind of the way that I wrote this is henceforth I will only be accepting, or henceforth I will only be available for. You can do it either way, whichever resonates harder with you. But henceforth I will only be available for, or I will only be accepting dot, dot, dot. And let's see what comes up. We'll come back together. Any questions on that? Nope, you got this. Awesome. Okay.
I will only be accepting the many gifts from the universe, the unconditional love from God, tapping into the abundance of support from others instead of saying, no, that's okay. I'm okay. I will accept help. I will accept that I can work with the time I have to achieve my goals. I accept that most people are good. And even though I'm inundated with the bad of the world, the good of the world is what should be amplified. Sorry, that's as far as I got.
Oh, that's gorgeous. I love it. So here's some of the stuff that I wrote. I said, henceforth, I will only be available for work that feels like satisfying play, community building, and world rebuilding, joyful adventures that contribute to the greater good, love rooted in respect, beauty, creation, and passion, opportunities that allow me to empower others to create authentically, delightful surprises, serendipity, synchronicity, gifts and blessings from the universe, flowing abundance of true wealth that grows exponentially and easefully in harmonious balance with nature, peace, ease, harmony, and flow through the natural cycles within and without, connection, guidance, awareness, and my favorite, bliss. There we go.
Love it. Yes.
So, this is the time where we are really invited to open our hands, accept the abundance, and also create, create, create. This is where we are coming into the execution phase on the larger cycle, right? And so all these things that we've been noodling about and thinking about and dreaming about and playing with, now's the time to start to take action on those things. And so this is what we're only going to be accepting, but what are we only going to be putting out into the world at this time? That's a little bit what we're going to be talking about next week, just as a little hint of what's coming up. But this week, I really invite you to just enjoy. Just enjoy. Look at the beautiful, beautiful flowers outside. Look at the beautiful sun and just enjoy life a little bit. On the 4th, May 4th, may the 4th be with you. Pluto does go retrograde, but we also have a first quarter moon. And so this is a time when we are invited to come into that organizing energy of like, what is possible and what could I be creating? And so really allow yourself to lean into curiosity this week. Anything that comes up that's like, that sounds interesting. I'm sort of interested in that. I'm sort of curious about that. Go down the rabbit hole. I had a really fun time this morning researching all that stuff that I told you about May Day and about Inanna. So now is a beautiful time to just lean into learning and receiving and enjoying. All right, my darling, we're gonna end early today
It's a
because
great note to end on.
yeah, because it's a great note to end on, and it's gorgeous outside, and we're gonna go and enjoy May Day. Okay,
Yes, you. All right.
see you next week.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.